Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement: Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're all available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. In addition to Bill Brenner here in studio, we've got a new host joining us for this segment. Of course, he's not new to the show, just new to this particular episode. Mr. Joff Thayer is in the house. Joff, welcome.
G'day, Paul. How are you? It's good to be here.
Doing great, my friend. And you've got an announcement, which I imagine is you're teaching one of your classes, right? You've got regex and you've got a C2 infrastructure.
Should I do that now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just finished teaching regular expressions the other week. Another run of that, and it was absolutely fantastic. By the way, people love that class. It's just so much fun. But anyway, upcoming this August 30th, starting Monday, August the 30th, I am teaching my Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development class. See, I'm getting used to saying that now. It's a 16-hour class, so we do 4 hours a day. We start early on the Monday. We start 11 a.m. Eastern time, go through to 4. We have a little pre-show banter there, and then we do 12 to 4 for the remaining days. And in the class, well, we do a whole lot of things. We do some commodity C2 stuff. We do some defensive landscape talk, some threat modeling, C2 channel. We talk about a custom C2 channel. We get into some development. We talk about C#, Python. We talk about Golang. Talk about lots of different shellcode execution methods. And we talk a little, future directions and future techniques that you can apply for red teamers and I guess purple teamers as well to use. And we just have a whole lot of fun.
It sounds awesome. I wanted to ask you if you're like me and maybe have a little bit of C development experience, but mostly Python. Picking up Golang, I would imagine, is not all that terrible to kind of pivot to?
No, it's not really, in the context of the class. So what I do is I give out a lot of source code as I'm teaching this. So I try to make it so that you sort of fill in the blanks and rearrange pieces, but I don't let you, I don't leave you at the deep end so that you have to develop this from the ground up when we're teaching. But it does help if you have some basic programming familiarity, because then you will be able to pick up the syntax of these other languages. And Golang, if you've been exposed to a little bit of C or C++ or C#, some combination of that, Golang will feel fairly intuitive to you because it really is based off those foundational languages.
Yeah, awesome. I was just about to ask, how much programming experience do you need to come into this class?
So it varies. There's a pretty good chance that I'm going to develop something that is going to be language specific at some point in the future. I don't want to overpromise here, but I am thinking about doing a C# for offensive operators kind of class in the future, because I really think that would be a helpful thing, and people have expressed interest in it. Mostly because there is some reaction to this class where people come out and go, well, this is really great, but you've got such a huge survey of different things. I'd like to kind of dive deeper into some things. And, that's a response to that. It's not so much dive deeper into the techniques, because a lot of the C2 channel and shellcode delivery techniques that I present, do translate nicely across languages. It's more, can I learn a little bit more about the programming aspects so I can get better at that language?
Right.
So
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff.
Hey, Paul, if you don't mind, another real quick. We mentioned last week that mine and a few other friends, SANS IoT hacking course, SEC 556, went live. Well, it went live, but it wasn't open for registration. But now, within the last couple of days, you can go to sans.org or sans.org/sec556, and you can register for the upcoming virtual beta 1. So the beta course is where we get to deliver the class and find out what's wrong with the delivery, figure out what we need to fix, and you get a 50% discount for coming to that early class.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
We put that one up like Tuesday, and there's already 10 registrations.
Nice.
Great. Yeah, good stuff.
Oh, while we're on plugs, I forgot to mention one other date. For those of you that are interested in coming to Wild West Hackin' Fest this September, I know COVID variant Delta is present amongst us, and there is a little bit of reticence, but I am teaching the class again live at Wild West Hackin' Fest the Tuesday, Wednesday before the conference, which is September 21 and 22. And I'm also teaching virtual, so it's a live virtual hybrid there. Awesome. But I hope I will see some friends actually at the conference, irregardless of the class, it's going to be a bunch of fun. So,
fantastic,
cool.
I thought my story number 4 is an interesting place to start, like how other people that maybe aren't entrenched in cybersecurity, like many of us, kind of look at ARP poisoning, because I think it's always kind of interesting to get that kind of this felt like it was kind of an outsider's view. Like basically I had to read the article a few times, not because of the technical content, but because of like the approach. Like what's your goal? Like in this article was like, well, my goal is I'm on a congested network at a college or university, and basically, like, I don't think they understand it to this level. Like, they want to kick other people off the network so they get more bandwidth. And so someone created this tool called Netcut. And when you look at Netcut, it's just like a really simple GUI that does ARP cache poisoning to like take people offline. I'm like, this is really evil.
The tool itself
Creative.
Looks a lot like Disney Circle's approach to network access blocking.
Yes. Yeah.
So when they poison, did you read actually where they're sending people? Are they just sort of giving them a bogus address so they just talk to nothing? Or
that was it. I'm not sure where they're sending people once they cut them, right? I guess it doesn't matter if you were.
And perhaps they don't know either.
That's the sense
which could have some very interesting results if 5 years down the line.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Especially if they keep that running.
I imagine they're just poisoning their default router gateway to a bogus address, so they're just talking to nothing, which would certainly give them more bandwidth, right? Because then they get to use the legitimate router gateway, and everything's good to go.
I was like, but I guess my whole thing is like, if you play games like this, you're gonna end up getting hurt. Certainly, network administrators are not going to be too keen on you running these kinds of tools. And of course,
a lot of the wireless access points are going to kick you off for messing with ARP too. Like most of the good ones and or any of the next gen appliances watch for this like type of ARP traffic, and they'll 100% deauth you and add your MAC address into a blacklist. So I'd be very careful running this.
Or alternatively, a lot of them are just going to do peer-to-peer traffic isolation anyway. So you can try, but you're not going to get anywhere with it.
Correct. He mentions
that tool's not going to do a lot.
Yeah, he mentions that in the article as well. But then I don't know, he wrote some kind of script that the writing was really hard to understand exactly what they were doing, like, because it wasn't a very well written article, and he was trying to describe what he was doing with, I think, probably a lack of full understanding of how layer 2 and ARP actually works. So I was left confused.
It was like hacking when we first got into it. Like
yes. It was like, I think I can do this. I mean, we all started in some place, so I don't want to knock the person I want to reiterate, like, you should have permission and you shouldn't pull shenanigans like this on a network, and maybe then ask people and spend the time to fully understand it. Because the reasons for doing this were nefarious. Like, just knocking other people offline is, like, that's not cool.
Not cool.
There were also, along those lines, 2 articles about a brief history of cryptography. Again, this was not what the article claimed to be. This was not what the title said it was. It was not a brief history of cryptography. It was basically like, oh, Diffie and Hellman came up, with public key cryptography, and that was the beginning. I'm like, no, that really wasn't the beginning of cryptography. And ironically, and so my advice to them, like, I don't want to discourage people that want to write articles like that, because you should, right? Do the research and write an article to convey your thoughts. I think helps your understanding of it. But find a mentor. I mean, I'm sure any of us would happily volunteer to help people that want to write articles like this to keep them on the right track. And, not so much as an editor, but a reviewer to say, like, what are you trying to accomplish, and explain things. My story number 5 actually was a really great article on the history of crypto, right? Talked about hieroglyphics and how, early forms of cryptography, and actually did a pretty good job, I thought, of capturing some of the history behind it. So it was ironic. I just happened to find these 2 articles, like one totally not the one you want to read, and the other one actually pretty good.
I love that those articles are out there. Not the ones that are inaccurate, but the fundamentals articles. I think we forget in the industry all too often, and one of my actual pet peeves is the way people don't understand DNS, by the way.
Yes.
But we forget all too often that there are some fundamentals that everybody needs to be reminded of, and an accurate description of cryptography fundamentals. That's a really important thing for a lot of us.
And it's really hard to do, because we've touched on it on previous segments, and some listeners have said, like, you really didn't get that right. And I think maybe that's true, but we're also trying to talk about it at such a higher level that it leaves it open for interpretation that could be like, oh, sure, you got that wrong, right? And it's our fault for starting at that high level, but not kind of digging into some of the details, which arguably have escaped a lot of our minds, because we really don't, to create an SSL certificate, key pair, we don't really need to know how the math and the protocol works. Well, we just need to be able to create the certificate, right?
That's an interesting comment, because there's one aspect of symmetric key cryptography in the mathematics that's really mysterious, and that is the construction of S boxes. And when you hear a mathematician talk about an S box, they never really can explain it well. It's just like, it's a substitution box, and we don't know what the imagination of the cryptographer, why they decided this substitution versus this other substitution. Like, this is like the voodoo magic in the cryptography algorithm, right?
And these are from the mathematicians.
Everything else people understand, right? They understand shifting left and shifting right and inverting things and whatever. But when they get to S boxes, they're like, ooh, this stuff's mysterious, right? And all of that is the mathematics of symmetric key cryptography, which is much, much deeper than the way that X509 TLS certificate-based systems work, right?
Yeah,
much deeper.
We need some segments on that. I think is what we've agreed as hosts, that we should start tackling some of these.
I think we volunteer Jeff, because he's not here, to explain it all at a deep mathematical level, and then we just sit back and we're like Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
We just heckle him from the peanut gallery.
We've talked about doing that MST3K thing. Now we can do it for Jeff when he explains cryptography.
That's right. We'll call it, Cyber Nerd 3K, and we'll just be throwing shit at him.
Bill.
Yeah, great.
For all of the security articles that I've written over 18 years, to this day, nothing frightens me more than doing an article about cryptography.
Yeah, because right. There's always someone that knows it better than you, is what I've found, especially with cryptography.
There's that. I've also found, and this is just my personal writing experience, but I always have tried to get to the human element of anything I write about, and it's hard to get to the human element. And you would think that it wouldn't be that way, because if you're interviewing, I've interviewed Diffie and Hellman separately.
Yep.
Fascinating interviews, but just struggling to keep up, especially with Diffie. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Diffie as well.
We had Whit Diffie on the show, didn't
You
we?
did. You
I know
did.
we did.
Yeah. But Bill,
He was hysterical.
But Bill,
I
you know
loved
what this makes you? Old.
Yeah.
18 years and a huge accomplishment.
Absolutely.
Hey, he just called you old. He's sitting right next to you. You can throw stuff at him, Bill.
well, he's not wrong. So,
I mean,
but just for our listeners too, so we hear you, and we want to make sure we get it right and bring you the information that you want. So we've made a pledge that we're going to bring on some of it will come from hosts that have expertise in certain areas of. I mean, cryptography is obviously a large subject matter, so some of it may come from hosts and some of it may come from external third parties. But I think it's one of those things that. We kind of forget some of the I think it was Dimitri, one of our listeners, was like, yeah, some of this stuff is like you study it for a test or you learn it for this project and then you forget about it, right?
Yeah.
And for the record, when I call Bill old, it's nothing but love because, Paul, how many years have we been doing this for?
This is our 16th year.
Yeah.
Old.
And who's old now?
Yeah.
Who's old now?
Old. Exactly.
Wait, how long have I been hanging out with you guys? At least
You
five
had
of
you
them.
had hair.
I had.
it's hard to believe that the ShmooCon where I made the Klingon wedding table crack was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yep. Oh, and so, Geoff, you mentioned DNS. I want to quickly segue into my story number 15, where researchers at Wix figured out a DNS loophole that I'm still kind of struggling to understand. And I don't want to say the article wasn't well written, but it was written in such a way it was difficult for me to understand, like the motivation and the why, and then also kind of specifically the how. It kind of, in my experience with Route 53, is very light. I actually had to help some folks with Route 53, and I'm like, well, I know DNS, and then they get into like A-name records, and I'm like, the hell's an A-name record? When did that come about? I never heard of that before. And the way that Route 53 does things with DNS is very different from, like, I'm editing my bind files by hand. I'm like, wait a minute, why can't I understand Route 53? Like, they're doing things differently. And so basically the crux of the attack was that registering certain special domains, specifically the name of the server itself, had unexpected consequences, right? So you would kind of, what I understood was you would register in your Route 53 instance a name that overlapped with one of the 16 authoritative DNS servers that Amazon was using in DNS. Did I understand that correctly?
Or 2,000 DNS servers. Like you're basically making a hosted zone for the official DNS servers of whichever registrar provider you're using that hosts DNS as well. And so there's kind of two aspects there, right? Like you're leveraging your ability to change records and register without verification names within inside of a registrar that also contains host records that's on a shared DNS, a managed DNS platform. So you're creating a hosted zone. And by doing that, that basically tells the other services that are within inside of that or utilizing those name servers that you're part of that name server, and then traffic begins to flow to you and causes kind of unintentional consequences to names or providers that are hosted within inside of that DNS resolution.
It allows me to register an authoritative DNS server.
So you're not authoritative. That's kind of the catch. You're technically you're utilizing a name that is kind of authoritative for it, but because it's hosted and you're utilizing that special name, there's kind of unintended consequences of how that multi-tenant traffic isolation is happening, and it begins to break that, and traffic begins to take that tenant isolation and route traffic.
Yeah, doesn't it come down to, I just read a little bit of the article, it comes down to also how Microsoft's using dynamic DNS to update the DNS server that you're feeding the client end, and they've done this for years. And ultimately, this thing amounts to being a bastardization of DNS, which irritates the living shit out of me, right?
Well, this is in AWS specifically as well.
Yeah, but people
it's in any number. They tested
DNS
on
was
those three.
always intended to be a local entity, right? Microsoft's making the assumption on their endpoints that if you're doing dynamic DNS to update the DNS server, it's something that's in your local network, right? It's not something that's across the internet. Yeah. Okay. Josh Wright and I are in the middle of writing some pretty large blog entries on DNS, so we're going to drop some stuff before long.
Oh, good. Awesome.
But that's a teaser. I've got to get with Josh and get things moving forward.
Such a tease.
But yeah.
Yeah. So the way Amazon's doing DNS and Route 53, I think falls in your category, Joff, of like just twisting it in ways it was never intended. Right?
It's not designed that way.
Yeah.
It's just not designed that way, right? I mean, I'm channeling Paul Vixie here, right? I mean, if you heard Paul talk at Wild West and Way West, and he's talking about the way these very large commercial vendors are twisting the intent of DNS and really screwing it up, and for their own purposes. I mean, it comes down to, again, surveillance capitalism and collecting data.
And because the interesting thing is, I didn't know this until recently, Amazon is a registrar. So when you configure Route 53, you can go, I want this domain. And Amazon goes, cool. Like, you can give me money and you can register this domain right through Amazon. Like, you don't have to go to Namecheap or register or wherever.
Right.
But that's kind of ubiquitous. That's kind of the key there, right? Is that managed managed DNS shopping providers,
right?
Like Google Cloud, Google Cloud, Akamai, all of those are the same exact way. So this vulnerability exists in all of those. I'm assuming it was fixed in Microsoft. Yeah. So it's just the fact that we're bending DNS for this multi-tenancy cloud hybrid managed DNS providers that are also registrars. Like that's kind of where a lot of this is stemmed from, and it's a hard problem to address, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, how'd that work out for Dyn? I mean, just saying. Anyway.
Larry, Lee, anyone?
Ugly comment.
Stories?
We got to do one of Lee's. There was one of Lee's that I really wanted to get into. It was the facial recognition one.
Oh, I had that one too. Oh man.
Yes. Master faces.
Yeah. Master faces.
Yes.
That was the master faces are terrifying looking.
Oh yeah.
Which story is this of these?
Yeah, this is
Larry's number 3.
Larry's number 3.
Yeah,
these are like master
Lee also had it too.
That's crazy.
Okay.
I did?
Yeah. Let's see here.
Yeah, this was an Israeli company that figured out a way to do nine different master faces using some neural net pathways and analyzing 3 of the common facial recognition libraries, and they basically broke it via 9 different mutated faces. And the math is fascinating. I've spent a ton of time breaking facial recognition over the last 2 years, and the way they did this is very, very similar to some stuff I was looking at, but they exponentially leverage some higher math that is just incredible and frankly terrifying, and kind of what we knew from the point of view, like 40 to 60% of all facial recognition could get broke with just 9 generated images. So again, this is a bad thing from the standpoint of like all of the technologies leveraging it.
If this works similar to like a master key for a lock, I still have to present this face to the facial recognition point of scan
device. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Which you can do with an image, and there's like liveliness tests. There's a bunch of IR things, but we've since proven, and there's several tests that for companies that we've done, there's ways around that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can leverage these images to kind of break these things, especially if you're interacting at like the API or SDK level and passing these images in the form of something outside of just the IR camera or hitting the stream of the IR camera on the chip.
Gotcha.
Isn't this also a case of when AI turns against AI, right? Because I imagine as they developed...
That is.
As they develop
that is the model, exactly what this is.
Yeah, as they develop the models to learn the algorithm, they're basically training another AI model to...
attack another AI model.
Right. Yep. And we've done this in the offensive industry as well. I mean, there's some work now where people are saying, well, hey, EDRs and vendors that are using AI models against our malware, well, we're just going to do the same thing you're doing, and our model's going to learn your model, and we're going to work our way around it. So too bad, so sad.
Yeah, there's some interesting ML and AI research going into the offensive space. In fact, Will Muhax is over at Microsoft now doing some very, very interesting work around offensive ML and the implications of what that can actually end up leading to. They did some initial work, I think 2 years ago. They released something at Black Hat, my cousin Nick and Will both, where they were able to utilize and graph out the full ML decision tree and come up with keywords that they could put into an email and get by any email filter, right? And that's
right. I remember seeing that.
To do that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and they did a great job at that. And in fact, I've leveraged that work, which is awesome. I feel like we need to go bwahaha right now or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some big implications for how we start to leverage these technologies, and it's going to get exponentially worse, and that's something that people aren't thinking about. There's a lot of defensive effort and big data that's leveraging all these ML and AI charts to kind of figure things out. But what happens when those start to get used against them? Like those neural networks are going to become kind of scary.
Oof.
Yep.
So interesting, as I was looking through things, Larry's number 4 caught my attention because of my number 7 story. My number 7 story is abuses of location technology used in the shipping, which we've talked about before in terms of GPS spoofing. Mm-hmm. But then Larry's story is about a ship that looks like it's been hijacked, but they're not sure. Yep. And I thought, is that an instance of a faked location, or is that for real?
So, and that said, and it mainly in the case of my story, it may not even be about the faked location. In that both your story and my story are using AIS for ship positioning, and much like ADSB, clear text protocol, easily spoofed, and can be used to alter course for both aircraft and ships on quote automatic pilot, or alter the decision of an actual pilot observing these messages as well. In the case of my story, the AIS messages that were being sent were not necessarily spoofing the location, but they were spoofing status messages, basically saying that the vessel was not under command, meaning that there was some problem that they couldn't steer, they couldn't propel in either forward or reverse. So spoofing different types of messages.
Interesting, because the one I saw for the mitigation on the AIS messing around was you can get a satellite image and you can use that to see what's really there, as opposed to the other. Basically it's a second source, a little harder to spoof, but obviously not something you just do in 5 seconds.
Right.
So I assume in the case of the missing ship, they've done something like that to see where the hell it is, to see if they can find it.
Yeah, it looks like they deployed aircraft to see if they can
works.
locate it. Yep.
This would be an interesting piracy. Like if you're able to just take control of the GPS and navigation system, have it deploy to waters that you control, and thus take dominance and dominion over something in your waters, like that's pretty legit.
Yep. Yeah, and that was similar types of things that we were trying to detect and combat with the Weilin project that Mike and I talked about, so that you could have a, quote, known good and compare that to other systems that were reporting potentially differences, like AIS, ADSB, and other potential reception sources. So, like, you could compare your location from GPS to, like, Baidu or GLONASS, depending on where you were on the planet.
The military ships are exempt from having to use AIX, but non-military are not. Although the military ships use them in high traffic areas because that's how they can see where everybody is. It's another source of information. So there is still a potential for a hack in the scenario. It's interesting stuff. I mean, it's like, dang. You forget what's just a clear text protocol that could be messed with. You think it's authoritative.
Yep. Like you start getting attribution is hard. Like let's send some AIS messages that maybe you're receiving your own, or you're receiving stuff from other ships, or ground stations are receiving AIS messages and saying, "Oh, hey, the U.S.'s ship is on the," or in the case of the one that I saw from the UK, a UK vessel was just off the coast of national waters, and I forget which country, and the nationals were out there harassing the Brits, saying, "Hey, you're in our waters," and the Brits are like, "No, we're not." Like, well, maybe we spoof AIS to say that the ship is in national waters, and then cause an incident because the country fires upon somebody in international waters.
Uh-oh.
Whoops.
And that's where things can go really wrong.
This is why you need to encrypt and authenticate your protocols, people.
No. Device identity is important. Is that a drinking penalty? I don't think so.
It should be. Drink, Lee.
I think it is. We'll drink to it.
Not like we need an excuse, right?
Not like we need an excuse, yes.
I had an article about Windows container escapes.
Ooh.
And I find it interesting when we say Windows container, because there's like Hyper-V containers, and then there's like Docker containers, and there's like namespace collision on the word container when we talk about containers on Windows. This felt to me, because they mentioned Kubernetes, that it was an escape for a Docker or Kubernetes, or whether it's a container running in Kubernetes or whether it's straight container, a breakout feature that used the file system, which those kinds of breakouts exist on Linux systems as well. And Microsoft's guidance I thought was interesting, is they say you should not use Windows containers as a security feature. They recommend using strictly Hyper-V containers for anything that relies on containerization as a security boundary. So my question was, so should you run a container inside of, or orchestrate it with Kubernetes and then run your Kubernetes inside of a Hyper-V container?
Yes.
Right? That made sense to me. I like containers so much, I put a container inside your container.
Yeah.
Which is on top of a virtual host, on top of a physical host, or maybe on top of a virtual host.
And then that can all run inside of a VM that's running,
How many layers deep can we go?
I've got a headache.
Yes.
It's only in one version of the reality, Lee, that you have a headache.
Oh, good. I'm glad the other times I don't.
Right?
So did I get that right? Tyler's like really studying. I can tell he's studying, trying to grok it all.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of general guidance for containers in general, right? Like there are certain controls and boundaries that containers are good at and are going to provide. But you start to talk about Kubernetes, and a lot of this was not designed as a security boundary.
Right.
Just like trust and Active Directory, that's not really a security boundary. Domains with inside the same forest, not a security boundary. Like these are concepts that by design are like that, and I think this is one of those that it applies not just to the Windows side, but Hyper-V is very, very well designed from a security standpoint, and they take all the way down to the bare metal and even down to like the TPM level, and VMware is the same way. They're integrating things like secure boot and TPM with authorized boot image verification and validation. Those are all done at the hypervisor level all the way up, from bare metal up. Containers are a little bit different. You don't have some of that luxury just based on the way the containers are actually designed and designed to be implemented. And so just using things for where they're designed to be used and keeping security boundaries where they're supposed to be kept. That's just general good practice for especially things like hypervisors and containers.
Yeah. One of the interesting comments in there, this reminds me of conversations, Paul, we've had about, running containers, right? It says any process running in a Windows Server container should be assumed to have the same privilege as admin on the host, and which in this case is the Kubernetes node.
Right.
So we've talked about the risks of privileged containers, and it sounds like we're right back there. We're running as admin or we're running as root again, and I'm glad the Hyper-V can secure it, but that just feels like a flaw in the container implementation.
Yep. Because containers are essentially like a glorified chroot jail, but if your chroot is running as root, then you're still root. And
root.
I interviewed a CyberArk researcher that created Kubesploit, which is a framework very similar to Metasploit that allows you to basically, if you get shell in a container, You can upload the, like, air quotes interpreter, right? You upload a little piece of code. It talks back to the framework and can start executing things, including escapes. Those escapes can also, if it's running in Kubernetes, exploit Kubernetes flaws to basically control the entire Kubernetes cluster if it's misconfigured properly. That's what we
misconfigured properly. I like that.
Yes, misconfigured properly. Evie and I agreed that like most of the things that he was exploiting in this framework were due to misconfiguration, such as one being like containers running as root. He's like, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people still run containers as root. And I mean, you can clean up Docker Hub all you want, but larger firms that have their own Kubernetes clusters, what Avi found was, hey, there's a problem, must be permissions, like just run the container as root, and hey, it works, and we'll go fix it later, and they never do.
Push it to production, we'll fix it later.
The root of the problem.
It is the root.
We'll put that hot patching mechanism in later so we can fix that.
Right.
That was not a bad joke. That was
we were constrained on time, but the other thing was, like, root is also a very interesting concept in Linux and to a certain extent Unix systems, but in the context of Linux, there are other ways to obtain privileges that are the equivalent, even higher than root, through various different mechanisms. A lot of the container escapes rely on things like seccomp and other privileges within Linux that can be manipulated, that user permissions really are just one layer. There's lots of other different layers of permissions within Linux systems, and usually that's how they're doing the container. So as a developer, for example, you say, oh great, I'm not running my container as root, but I'm giving it all of the privileges that you could give to a container, which is essentially the same thing as, like, those privileges say, I can load a kernel module, and that kernel module can shovel me back a root shell. Okay, I'm not running as root, but I'm still allowing through those various other permissions.
One of my questions that came out as reading this is that, as you head down the article, it talks about Palo Alto's ability to detect this stuff. I'm wondering, out in Azure, Microsoft has a huge security framework that I'm wondering if it can detect the stuff being improperly configured. Because I know where it's dialed in on stuff. Boy, does it let you know when things aren't right.
Yeah, but Microsoft's also had problems in their containerization in Azure that have led to a lot of privilege. It's very similar to what I was describing. Yeah, similar kinds of issues.
Just because it's working doesn't mean you're done, right?
That's it. Also kind of in the, like, I put a container inside your container. Cobalt Strike.
Hot Cobalt.
Yeah. Right? Hot Cobalt. So a good tool used by bad people has a vulnerability that good people can use against bad people using the good tool, is how I summarize it.
Or bad people against other bad people.
Or bad people against good people.
Right? Good people against good people. I guess it's pretty ubiquitous.
I think I just got whiplash.
It sounds like a song here.
Good. It's a pretty cool vulnerability. Honestly, it allows you to register fake beacons, and beacons are the C2 command and control traffic that goes back and forth between the client and the server. Yep. Those beacons, when you can register those fake beacons back to the server via this vulnerability, which is I believe it was CVE, it was like 36.7 something, 790.
798. Yeah.
Yeah. So they utilize that CVE. And you can do a bunch of tasks. You can register an unlimited number of these fake beacons and then send tasks up to the server and basically do a denial of service against the server. And that'll basically take down the Cobalt Strike server until you reboot it. You can do an unlimited amount of these tasks and have that tasking continue to happen, thus causing that command and control server to be rendered useless.
Can you put limitations in Cobalt Strike, like it'll only accept so many beacons? Right, I would imagine that's a way to, because it's basically a memory exhaustion, but you can combat memory exhaustion in any program by limiting the number, putting a hard limit on there. No,
so that's not built into Cobalt Strike itself, as far as I'm aware. But if you're doing your due diligence as a C2 infrastructure operator. You're probably running your C2 channels through some well-known CDN, and if it's really trivial to drop some firewall rules on that.
Absolutely.
You control it at the network layer, Joff, as to how many connections. You limit the connections of the network layer, essentially.
Yep.
But
I've seen this thing in action. Actually, I've seen it against my own infrastructures. Play out. So I think it's been around for some time.
Yeah, same. And the other one too that becomes interesting too is that, the world has changed over the last almost 2 years. Like putting those firewall rules in to only have devices connect to your C2 from enterprise IPs. Maybe they're working from home and have split tunnel VPN or don't have a VPN on at the time, and that another challenge there.
Yeah. I mean, there's some challenges, obviously. Right?
Yeah, when you're running an attack to Cobalt Strike 4.4, it's been patched. Rafi took a little while to patch this. The fundamental design of how the connection is established for the initial beacon request back to the server, I imagine, took a little bit of reworking. So. It did take a little bit to patch, but it is 4.4 fixes it, and it's
stable. And I'm sure the regression testing was huge, right? Because if you're changing the way beacons communicate back to the server, that is a fundamental function of Cobalt Strike. And so you make code changes in that part of the code. You're like, I got to make sure I didn't break anything.
Too, so your traffic can be, all malleable. You got your profiles, and you're talking about, like you said, a very fundamental core. Whether it's HTTPS, DNS, external C2, through other means and channels.
I hate fixing bugs like that. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt, but good for him for fixing it. Nice. So interesting. Cisco patches a critical vulnerability in small business VPN routers. I feel like we cover this story all the time, and I kind of break it down into like 4 things that are always maybe not always, but most of the time true. Like 1, it's often the web interface on an appliance or IoT device.
Very
2,
common. Yeah.
It's never supposed to be exposed to the internet. 3, scans always show that there's thousands or some certain number that are exposed to the internet. And 4, it always allows air quotes specially crafted HTTP requests to effective device to either cause denial of service or remote code execution. Hence, we get the patch from Cisco that the vulnerability was exploiting a bug could allow an unauthenticated attacker to send specially crafted HTTP requests to an affected device, which could allow them to execute arbitrary code or cause denial of service conditions. This affects the web management interface, which is locally accessible by default. What I thought was interesting is it cannot be disabled. And I found this in IoT devices that certain management functions or services and or protocols, you can't turn them off. I mean, you could if you could get a hold of the firmware, reverse engineer it, make a change, put it all back together, and then reflash it on the device. But dude, I've tried that. That's dicey.
And unless you have a dedicated management port, you can't put that on a management network, right? That's often a shared port, and that HTTP service runs on the LAN ports. It's not especially in the small and medium business routers. There's no dedicated management port for isolating that HTTP access from the inside.
Correct.
I mean, what cracks me up is first of all, Paul, your description of the recipe is dead on, right? It's a 4-step thing, and we've gone over it so many times.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's the recipe.
You should write that up.
The part that always amuses me and makes me chuckle every single time is the specially crafted part.
Always specially crafted. 16 years doing this show, Joff, they've always used the term a specially crafted request.
And the thing is, it's not that special most of the time.
But it is crafted.
I mean, usually it's, in this case, you're reverse engineering the HTTP server, and you're looking for, as printf or mem copy, and it's a buffer overflow, or it's the specially crafted. I mentioned Joel's backdoor. That was a specific user agent string, which was it, like Joel's backdoor spelled backwards or something like that? In the user agent string would get treated differently and allow you to gain admin privileges to the machine. So specially crafted, I mean, we poke fun at it, but that's really kind of what we're after is what... looking at the code, what can we specially craft to make the code do something different?
It was crafted, and it was special.
It was special, all right. Yeah.
It just amazes me today that the web management interface is still the vector. Like, manufacturers just haven't learned that is essentially the low-hanging fruit in a lot of these cases. An attacker, I mean, when you're reverse engineering firmware, it's one of the first things that I look for. I'm like, all right, does it have a web management interface? What's that binary? Give me that binary. Let me, start pulling it apart, and usually you can find something in there.
Yeah, like 9 times out of 10, you're going to find an injection vulnerability of some sort in it.
You're going to find something.
And for what it is,
yeah,
it's going to be command injection. It's going to be probably command injection, most of the time. But, SQL injection, unlikely because there's probably no database.
Right.
Yeah. It's usually a bypass too, authentication bypass.
Authentication bypass or command injection.
Because you're taking like a whole bunch of functionality and you're trying to squash it down into like this one small binary so it can run inside of firmware running on a small device who's, let's be frank, in this case, like the purpose of this device is for a VPN router. It's not to have the world's most robust admin web interface. It just... So many times we've talked about this same exact situation. It's just astonishing. It's still here.
Just thinking again about my journalism days, I've written the same exact story dozens and dozens of times.
Yes, that's what the experience on the show. We've covered this story like dozens and dozens.
It's just funny the way attack techniques advance, the way technology in general advances. When it comes down to vulnerabilities, it's just the same shit.
Yeah,
over and over and over again.
Well, it's interesting. I want to, I think, go to my story number 11, which I wanted to foster a discussion here tonight. And this was an interview with someone from the EFF, Ava Galperin. Seems like a very smart lady, and she is the director of cybersecurity for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Now, she said stuff that maybe we still agree with, maybe we don't agree with today. She said nothing is unhackable. I think largely we're probably like behind all that, right? She said the more complicated the device, the more complicated software, it opens it up to interaction with other applications or research, and it's likely you're creating additional attack surface. Now, she also says playing offense is easy because all you need to do is find a vulnerability. Playing defense is hard because you need to defend yourself on all fronts all the time.
Against all possible and unknown vulnerabilities.
Right.
That's kind of I have to disagree with that statement. In fact, I did a talk.
Because it's cliche. I feel like we need to debate it.
That's a little too generalized, I think.
I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah, we go into that in that talk, right? Like, we as attackers fundamentally have to know everything about everything. We have to know all of the devices, all of the appliances, all the technologies, all the protocols, the underlying hardware, how chips communicate. We have to understand them at a fundamentally lower level and more in-depth level than any defender has to in any case in order to be able to break those.
Right.
And not
but
just
not only
a simple environment.
Tyler, to your point, not only understand how they work, but how they're used, which are two totally different things, right? Yep. I often find myself reading a thing like they're attacking something. I'm like, all right, I'm getting like how it works kind of thing, but I'm like, how's it used? Because oftentimes we're abusing one or the other or both, how it's used and how it's built, right? And but you, as an attacker, you got to understand both those things.
Yeah, and you have to know that at a fundamental level, not just the technology, the application. We're talking about the binaries, the DLLs being loaded, how those DLLs interact with the OS at a user level, at a kernel level, the protocol and protocol stacks that are communicating from that binary all the way through to a hardware level, where that hardware level may have security protocols and implementations that are doing mitigating controls. How do we actually attack those? So from the beginning to the end of this, for almost all applications and technologies and all protocols, we're having to understand all that. So that being right once and it's easy to be an attacker, I call that a load of BS. And there's a reason that it takes us 10 to 20 years to get to the place where we can do a good job of emulating sophisticated attackers.
Well, and more to the point, we as offensive operators don't know everything. We actually have to have the ability to research and get up to speed on things really quickly. On the defender side, they have if they're doing it well, they have an understanding of the assets they're defending. So they have fixed context.
You said it. Sorry, I chuckled there, but you said if they were doing it well. So yeah,
I put a
you qualified that. Yeah, you did.
Yes.
They should have a context of an understanding of what they're defending, and then they should get well educated on the context and understanding on what they're defending. Now, I'm not saying they do it right all the time, but at least they do have a square box within which to drive at a certain period of time. I don't think the offensive side has that. We're always branching out in all different areas all the time,
I don't disagree that defense is hard, but I don't think that the hardest part is you have to defend yourself on all fronts all the time. I mean, that kind of is just scratching the surface. I think one of the most difficult things you have to do as a defender is like talk to people and convince them that security is important and that they have to do something about it. Like, that's why defense is hard, right? Not because you can't defend on all fronts all the time. You can put certain countermeasures in place on all of those fronts, but you're going to give up some of those fronts in some capacity, right? I think the real challenge is the people skills, the operationalization of security, and how it comes forth in your environment.
Don't forget the word scale. Scale does matter.
Yep. So you're just adding all those things, in my opinion, that makes all this harder. I'll go back to some things that Joff said earlier about which job is harder. And Joff said, I'm going to give you 5 payloads to run in your environment. And they said, yeah, if it works. And Joff's comment was, oh, it'll work.
That's that attacker mentality, right?
Because, but he only needed 1 out of those 5. And to me, that sort of, like if I think about that from the perspective of which job is harder, who's winning in that scenario?
Yeah,
it's not the defenders.
If we're comparing that, we're comparing apples and oranges. Like, why are we comparing which job is harder? Honestly, like, I don't want to ever say that defense is easy. Defense is very, very hard. Like, most of us have spent a long time in network admin and sysadmin work and development work, for that matter.
I want to dispel. I want to dispel the myth. I think is what we're getting at. Dispel the myth that attackers only have to be right once and defenders have to be right all the time. I think that's a complete myth. I think both roles have certain challenges. They're different challenges, but they have challenges. As a defender, we know you're never going to be right all the time. It's about being right in the right places at the right time with the right people, right? That's going to make you win. You know, you can't keep tabs on everything today. I mean, maybe there was a time, 20, 30 years ago when you had one computer that, maybe that statement was true. Like you could be right all the time because you could just look at that one log file there or whatever, and you knew all the modem lines coming in. But those days are gone. You have way too much attack surface today to even remotely keep you up at night. I have to be right all the time. Like, that's not a reality today. There's no defender that's right all the time.
Yeah, and I think the title kind of is also misleading. Like, there's a ton of great information in here that gets into many other debates that I think are much more fascinating than, red only has to be right once and defense, is really hard.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm picking on that as a discussion point. Ava is an extremely smart individual and had some wonderful things to say and is incredibly bright.
Sure.
Yeah, the boycott, disinvestment, the sanctions. Like, she got into a lot of the disinformation pieces that are very, very important. The Amnesty and NSO group stuff. Like, there's a ton of stuff in this article that are well worth the read. Very, very intriguing. That, again, like the title, I think was not a great thing.
We're just nitpicking on. We're plucking out certain things. For the sheer purpose of discussion, right? And to kind of dispel some myths, right? And we're taking it out of context, basically. And I don't want that to reflect poorly on Ava because she's awesome.
But to take the article title out of context,
because you can, right?
Nothing is unhackable.
Which is also not true, Larry, because I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Yeah, because can we build something that is unhackable?
I don't know. Can we, Larry? Thinking about that as an exercise.
So my thought exercise comes back to something that I just watched this week, in that we're talking about computers and we're talking about all this stuff. So remove all the computers and move back to analog systems. Or mechanical systems, for that matter. And I watched this.
You know what you hack? The people.
No, you don't even need to do that. So in this particular, we could hack the people, right? In this particular case, I watch a show on YouTube called Vice Script Garage, and it's called that for a reason because he uses Vice scripts for everything, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
I'm down with that though. Vice scripts are pretty universal.
Yeah. So basically, the big thing for his channel is that he finds this vehicle that's been in a cow field for 30 years, and he brings a minimal set of tools and he gets the car running and he drives it home, like sometimes in excess of 600 miles. And I learned in the last 2 sets of episodes that I learned was that, like, if you know what you're doing, it's super easy to hotwire a car in the older analog systems. And it wasn't even that you were taking 2 wires together and you're putting them together and it starts.
That's just in the movies?
And that's exactly what he said. That's just in the movies.
Yeah.
And what you're finding is that when you turn the key, it pushes a mechanical rod that pushes a switch. Like, okay, so you just pull the switch down and you stick this thing in and you go vroom, like you hack the mechanical system. Because he had a car that he was working on that had literally no key in the column. And he took a piece out of the headliner, a piece of wire, and started the car with this piece of headliner, and that was his key for the 600-mile journey home.
It's awesome hacking.
Another one, he had a 1981 International Scout in a field for 20 years and had keys, but you could turn it to the accessory and everything would work. But you could turn it forward and it wouldn't work. So what did he do? He took apart the steering column and took this bar and went, bent the thing because it was pushing it too far. And then it starts.
I finished the book Exploding the Phone, which was really good. And we're trying to reach out to the author to get him on the show because he did a great job. And when we talk about some of the first phone system switches, and the switching mechanism, as we know from the movies and TV back in the day, right, was an actual person. And that doesn't mean that they weren't hacking the phone system. They were just hacking the people so they would connect it to the right thing. It was basically social engineering. So, nothing's unhackable. Larry, you always used to give the example of a computer not connected to anything, buried in 20 feet of concrete is not hackable, but
it's not usable either.
It's not usable. But I'm going to social engineer the person who's looking over that, going, "Hey, I need to do maintenance on that." Right?
Yeah,
so we're going to go get that computer and do some air quotes maintenance on it. Right? So, yeah, definitely usability and security is an interesting relationship.
Unrelated. Before we leave here tonight, I want you to look at my Audible library and pick out the book that I'm going to read next what I've got in there, because I just finished the Masters of Deception on the way here.
Great book, right?
Yeah. Except for the audio quality, that sucked.
Yeah.
But I literally finished it as I was coming up to the light out here. And now I need to pick something new for the ride home and onward.
Yeah, I got the next one.
I'm currently listening to. Go ahead, Joe.
Does Audible allow you to create a friend's reading list? Because on
Amazon you can create it as an Amazon wish list, and I have it, and I put the link in our Discord. I'll stick it in again after the show.
Yeah,
awesome.
now that'd be cool.
You can share now too, right? Like share audiobooks.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not, maybe.
In any case, I've got a bunch of books that are sort of at the top of the list that I should that I want to listen to. But tell me which one I should read next.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm listening to 3 books at the same time, depending on the audience. When it's my wife and I in the car, we're listening to the accounting of Apollo 13 from Gus Grissom and others. When the kids are in the car, we're listening to Code Girls.
Yeah. That's on my list.
Yep.
I haven't listened to it yet, but it's actually in my library. I bought it.
And when listening by myself, it's now to be determined. So,
hold on. I had a place to bring us.
iOS 14.7.1. Get your damn phones updated. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And your Macs.
What's going on with that?
Yeah.
There's some CVEs and some bug fixes in there that they're not really. They're being pretty cagey about, and from what
Apple being cagey about vulnerabilities? No.
I know it's the first time, Paul. Just relax. They promise never to do it again.
My buddies over there were saying this one is being actively exploited and is very, very, very serious from the implications at a kernel level and maintaining access. So I don't know how much more serious it can get.
As Larry and Geoff click about this Mac.
Yep. I did want to talk about assless chaps.
Okay. Oh my!
First up, by definition, chaps are assless.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'd be pants.
Correct.
Okay.
What if they're MS chap?
Point.
What if they're MS chip? Microsoft chaps.
MS chap v2
of the version 2 variety. Yes.
Then they might be assless.
Well, no. They might not only be assless, they might be encapsulated too.
Well, it depends on the delivery method, right, Joff? If it's
MS Chat V2 is like it's a Wi-Fi. It was in a
it's Microsoft.
EAP.
It's Microsoft.
It was in an EAP thing.
Yep,
right?
multiple.
It was buried inside of an EAP protocol, challenge response.
Yeah.
Yep. PEEP.
Yes.
Also potentially EAP TLS and Cisco Leap.
Yes.
Cisco.
It's all coming. The EAP protocols. It's all coming back to me.
And it's a Microsoft protocol.
Yep.
So not new. Josh with a sleep under a Cisco Leap did some very I can remember back in the day teaching the mechanisms of what went into MS Chat V2.
Right.
In that your password is divided into 3 chunks and it's done a single round of DES, not triple DES, single round of DES on each one of the chunks, and the last chunk is always padded, and so we can predictably calculate the end. So if you can generate possible a table, so you can do lookups by the last couple of bytes, then crack super fast.
And so is this new? This cracking MS Chat V2 NTLM V1 challenge response quickly using a database of NT hashes?
So the attack, in my opinion, is not new. Like right in the GitHub, it says it doesn't require the clear text password to be cracked. We just need the NT hash. And talks about MS Chat, splits the hash into 3 parts, so forth and so on. And is time memory trade-off for a rainbow table. So I'm not sure what the differences is here. The big one, so to me it looks like a re-implementation of Asleep, which can be used standalone and all of those types of things.
It's like Asleep with rainbow tables, right?
Yeah.
But Asleep could do rainbow tables. Asleep could create those rainbow tables as well.
But not on the not on the V1 exchange hash that's broken up, right? Like this is taking and breaking that optimization up, right?
Nope. You mean the breaking up, meaning the 7 character with the DES? No, Asleep would pre-calculate all of that.
Okay.
So, so it looks like a re-implementation of that. However, the thing that I think that I do is pretty interesting in that they can create the word lists and rules and all that type of stuff to create massive rainbow tables using Hashcat and the output of Have I Been Pwned.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Sexy.
So to me, that's
nice
where
upgrade.
the sexy comes from.
So is it an optimization of the rainbow tables pre-calculated for this attack based on the Have I Been Pwned and building the database for easy optimization utilizing regular hardware? Like that's what it seems like.
It's what it seems like too.
Okay.
Yep.
It looks like a process improvement, so you can crack
agreed.
them faster, basically.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And the ability to create the rainbow tables with Hashcat, so that you can calculate it once and do it better.
When Josh wrote Asleep, Hashcat didn't exist.
Correct.
Yeah.
It did not.
Yeah.
It was all CPU based. So Asleep was for Cisco Leap, which leveraged MS Chat V2 in the air, unprotected. There was no MS Chat V2 attacks available at the time, and Josh wrote them.
Right.
My understanding was that there was one other thing that he based his work on, and I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah. It was like some kind of like book reference. It was something weird like that. Like someone in a book somewhere wrote a paragraph, and that was literally like the key to him.
That was the Oracle Oracle attack.
That was the Oracle attack. Yeah. I love stories like that, by the way.
But then later, Moxie Marlinspike effectively created a service to crack MS Chat V2 passwords, and I can't remember what the name of it was.
Oh, I remember that too.
And it used the techniques that Josh had researched and developed.
Because no one used Leap anymore, right? Because it went to EAP TLS, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it actually went to PEEP. No, I'm sorry. It went to
PEEP and then EAP TLS.
It went to EAP Fast on the Cisco side. So Leap was a Cisco proprietary protocol.
Right.
and Josh disclosed the vulnerabilities into Cisco Leap. That was when I met Josh.
That was
through Ocean.
Those were early days.
Through Ocean. And
that was a long time ago.
That was when we first met Josh.
And Josh was really sick. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
I do.
And that was because of all of the stress that he was under, because Cisco threatened to sue him and take everything he owned, including making his family live under a bridge in a cardboard box and send him to prison.
Crazy.
Whoa.
Because he disclosed this to Cisco and said, "Hey, this is a problem. You should fix this." And they thought that Cisco thought he was going to extort them, so they sued him and threatened to take everything away.
So in the repo is the slides from DEF CON 29 with the talk, and in there is a picture of Josh's slides from DC 11 2003, where he looks like shit.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And so there was a big story there. Eventually, Josh was able to release that, and Cisco basically says, "Yeah, we're working on a fix," and never went back to Josh and said, "Yeah, you can release this. We've got our fix." They just came out and announced that, "Hey, all of our Cisco customers, we have the latest and greatest Wi-Fi security authentication thing since sliced bread. You should probably upgrade from Cisco Leap to Eep Fast immediately." Oh, and by the way, in order to do so, you need to upgrade your access point hardware.
Yeah, because it's an opportunity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was or not. And Josh took that as his cue to say, "Yep, they fixed the problem. Here's their update. You should do Eep Fast." So then he released Asleep. Yep. And Asleep. So another fun story about Asleep. Josh went to a customer. And they said, "Josh, we know you wrote Asleep, but we can't get it to work."
Yeah.
And so we're going to challenge you that if we want you to break our Leap network, and if you can't break recover the password for users on our network, we don't pay for the assessment. But if you can, we'll pay you 3 times the regular quoted value. And Josh's comment was, "I wrote Asleep. Like, I can make this work. Yeah, game on. Send me a packet capture or send me traffic." So they did. In Wireshark screenshots. Like boom. Yeah. And he's like, "Well, okay, fine. I read all of that stuff in from the packet capture and use it as variables in my program. So I'll just read it off the screenshot, and I'll make it so now I can define those variables from the command line. Thank you very much." And in about 3 minutes, he recovered their password.
That's awesome.
The reason why they couldn't make it work, they were using shitty dictionaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
That's funny. That is funny.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stories.
Last little bit. We're getting solar.
This is like the history of breaking cryptography. Which is amazing.
So we're getting solar installed in our house in about a month. And in order to do so, I had to clear 12 feet of wall space next to my panel because we're getting a couple Tesla Power walls and all sorts of fun stuff. And in doing so, I had to clean out this bookcase that was in our basement. And I found a set of Sec 617 books.
Oh, not the original ones.
From when you and I took the class together.
It's funny when you said that you were offering the first iteration of IoT. And what is your class called?
IoT penetration testing.
And what is the URL? sans.org
Sec 556.
Sec 556. I immediately thought of when you and I sat in Josh's class, which I believe was the first time Josh taught 617, and we're just enamored with everything that he was saying, and recorded episode 1 of the podcast in Los Angeles.
Yep.
At that Sans event.
And I had the books that came from that class. And I know this because they had all the little tabs on the side. So when I took the cert, I knew how to look things up.
Yep.
2005.
And a lot of that information is still valid today because like those crypto protocols haven't
changed.
I mean, there's been new iterations of them, right?
But still in use. Additional encapsulation to some of the protocols.
Yeah.
The RF hasn't changed. The RF, the physical layer, hasn't changed. But you know what I did?
You tossed them.
I recycled them.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's kind of
I had to.
Happy, sad at the same time, right?
Yeah, truth be told, when I took over authorship, the lead authorship of 617, Josh actually gave me a copy of those slides.
Right.
And he says, "Please don't judge me for any of this. These are awful." And I'm like, "No, Josh, these are awesome."
No,
actually,
they're awesome. Yeah, it was an awesome class. I learned a lot
because we actually borrowed some of his content from the 2005 class 2 years ago and put it in the class.
Right. Yeah.
Because like the RF layer doesn't change.
Yeah, some shit just doesn't change.
Yeah.
A couple more stories I want to call out. I like my story number 7, productivity tools for hacksaws, right? Although it's, got a corny kind of title with elite speak and stuff. I like articles like this because maybe they'll tell me about a tool that I haven't tried out. Sure enough, they did. There was one called Joplin that allows for note taking. You can copy and paste images. There's a VI mode, and it stores all of your stuff in your Dropbox account. So if you're using it across multiple systems, it stores it. It's free. It's open source. It has markdown language. I was like, you know what? For note taking, I was using Sublime, but it didn't easily have that mechanism where I could share it across multiple machines. And like for note taking and stuff, I thought this was pretty awesome.
Yeah, we tested that out a while back with some of our operational notes. It's actually fairly feature rich for an open source project.
Also, I thought it was a neat trick in Linux. You can switch your caps lock key to be your escape key if your escape key is too far away. And if you're using VI as your editor, that actually is a pretty handy little tip. I was like, oh, I kind of like that because from early days in using computers, I'm like, what is the purpose of the caps lock key? It's so annoying, and especially if you're editing in VI, God forbid you hit the caps lock key by accident. Oh, crap. Like, all kinds of weird shit starts happening.
Yeah, and I hit the caps lock key when I mean to hit tab, but I actually find that I use caps lock reasonably
when you need to yell at someone in Discord.
Yeah,
when
I
you
get it. Cruise control for cool. But is the escape key really that far away? And is it really far away enough to break 30 plus years of training as to where the damn escape key is on the keyboard?
Very true. I looked at my keyboard, Larry, because I've got a nice 10 keyless keyboard, and my escape key is not all that far away. So I think if you have the right keyboard, it's certainly a thing. What else do I want to call out? Well, we talked about the Microsoft one. Oh, a couple more open source things. So there was my story number 10 was an article about how someone monitors SSH sessions with Prometheus and Grafana. Has anyone used Prometheus or Grafana? Did you know these existed? I'm right there with you if you didn't know what they were.
No.
Prometheus is a time series database for monitoring. Grafana allows you to, quote, query, visualize, alert on, and understand your data no matter where it's stored.
We used
those could be handy things, and he put it all together.
We used Grafana
I've
with
heard
Wayland.
about Grafana before.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it's kind of very generalistic, right? You can apply to Grafana to just about anything.
Yes, you can.
I thought that was cool stuff to look into.
Yeah, we applied Grafana to GPS latitude and longitude as captured by a device from Wayland, from a device that should be in a static location. All of a sudden, if the Grafana graph jumps, that means all of a sudden your GPS location changed in a thing that was supposed to be in a static location.
I kind of use the show notes sometimes. Like, we may not go into huge depth about these stories. To just flag stuff that like I might need later, right? Because I imagine like months from now, I'm going to be talking to my coworker Adrian Sanabria, and we'll be like, I really need like a time series database for monitoring. I'm like, wait, I talked about that on a show. This is my database of stuff. Yeah.
For 16 years, I've been doing that.
Yes.
I think the wiki was a little bit more coercive to search, and now we've got the blog and the wiki to search. And some of them don't all.
It's just a matter if I want to take on the project of bringing those two together.
Fix it.
It's just, which is a data problem and not sexy, right? Yeah. I'd rather work on cool.
There's developers in India that will do short money for that.
I do have some tech segment stuff coming up. I've got one-liners that you can run Nmap with the vulner script and OpenVAS using containers, and I thought that was pretty handy. And like I kind of worked on it a little bit to be like, if I just want the one-liner, what should it be? So I'm going to put together a tech segment for our audience, and hopefully put together a webcast where I'll go into a lot more detail on how to set all that stuff up, because the setup takes a lot more time, to get to that point. And also, like, how you analyze the data is another thing. I'm looking at some open source projects, which admittedly have a couple of bugs. They were responsive to some of our issues that we filed with them and fixed stuff. So some pretty cool open source stuff on the vulnerability management side that Adrian and I are looking at and collaborating on. So one of the last stories I want to talk about.
Lee's got one.
Lee, you go first because mine was silly.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you if we could save the silly one to the end. I actually had two I want to touch on really quick. One, yes, I'm trolling Joff with my number 5, but rather than poking at Australia, what it is in this one state in Western Australia, they were collecting contact tracing data. They had some flaws, but they fixed them. But they had their data accessed by legal mandate because they weren't clear on the legal protections, so they couldn't protect the data the way their customers were told they could. It's court order versus what you want to do. I mean, my heart goes out to these guys. I mean, come on. You've got it all set. You get it secure. You fix the security holes. You think you got it. You can do exactly what you said. And then a legal document says, give us the data. And then their auditor found them and said, what? You can't do that. So apparently the regulator wasn't aware of the legal constraint. And they've actually changed law because of this. And I just thought that, like I said, that's crazy. So know your data protection.
Yep. And Lee, your next story on that one, just real quick. The hyphenation threw me for a loop on this one because the Lazio region vaccine portal is held hostage by hackers. I read this is I just read the second line. It says 19-shot booking system. I'm like, shit, what vaccine did Italy get that they need 19 shots? But it's COVID-19. Like, oh shit.
I totally read it that way as well. I saw that and I was like, 19 freaking shots? What?
Freaking Italians.
Just on the privacy and control of your data, I appeared on episode 77 of the Privacy Please podcast with Cam and Gabe Gums. And one of the things that they ask you in this podcast is like, where do you see the future of privacy? And I described kind of two scenarios, right? There's this dystopian future where corporations have complete control of your data and are acting upon that basically so they profit but don't care whether you have a bad time or not, right? So your driving habits, the kind of clothing that you buy is monitored by your washing machine. Like in this really, privacy is thrown out the window. I'm like, the other extreme is we live in this utopian society where we maintain control over our data, that we're allowed and able to define what data is shared, how it's shared, who it's shared with. The companies have to disclose how the data is being used and who it's shared with. And if I want my data removed, I can do that. Kind of like GDPR on steroids, but for everyone to limit the control the corporations have over your data and give all of that control back to you. Lee, your story kind of reminded me of me comparing these two different scenarios. And I think coming down to, we're probably going to end up somewhere in between, right? And not in any extreme, but even as sometimes unoptimistic as I am about privacy, I do believe that giving people the option is the right thing. And allowing them to control and full disclosure is definitely the way to go. And, I gave the example I shared on the show a few weeks ago, my wife and the Dunkin' Donuts app. Like, if Dunkin' Donuts told me what they were doing with my data, and that was an acceptable level of risk to me for me to get free coffee, like that should be, like, you should agree with big corporations that, like, hey, that's cool. Where it gets shady and pisses people off is when the EULA is 18,000 pages long, and you don't know like what privacy you're giving up, but you're getting free coffee. Like, that's a bad scenario.
Yeah, there needs to be very clear and unambiguous statements that are put in front of people where they make that choice, and there's no question about it. It's like, you are trading your privacy for this benefit, and it needs to be. And I don't think that's that difficult to actually put forward. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree.
And you mentioned dystopian future. I think that's the dystopian present right now.
Yeah. Certainly it is.
And it's already way too late for that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think the lawyers have got us going by that one. Clearly around the lower nether regions, the lawyers have a firm grip.
Whoa.
Otherwise known as gotcha by the balls?
Yeah.
That kind of. I was trying not to get too base.
Well, I mean, like Tuesday was National Grab Some Nuts Day. They didn't specify what kind of nuts, though. But in any case,
if I had known that, Larry, you should have texted me, because I would have gone to the dojo where I work out with all women and me, and I would have loved to throw that out there and said, "Hey, guess what, ladies?"
Yeah. Jeff, they wouldn't have been gentle. Just saying.
Yeah. and Jeff, it was probably just better that you stayed home and grabbed your own nuts.
Yeah.
Which, you did. We know you did anyways. Yeah. So every day is grab some nuts day. So.
Lee, you had a second story before we talk about toilets.
I wanted to talk about my number one. I want to talk about Vulture.
I'm glad you don't want to talk about your number two, because that could get awkward.
No. We already talked about.
We'll talk about the number two as the last story.
Yes.
Yeah. So the
Android malware.
Yeah. It's really kind of cool. It's called Vulture, and with a lot of the Android malware, they create an overlay that can capture your credentials. So it's sitting there between the app and the user. But these guys, what they did is they use an overlay to trick you to install their app and over provision it. But it's really doing is it's running VNC and capturing the keystrokes and the screens and sending them off to their server over in the cloud somewhere. So it's really hard to see that it's doing that, and it's really flexible. Instead of just capturing the one app that you've got the overlay for, it's capturing the whole freaking device wherever you're putting credentials.
So every password that you type in, it shows that letter on the screen, like for that fraction of a second. So you know that. Yep, and that's what they capture.
And you've got the keystroke too.
Yep,
I've actually done that before on a point of sale device, just continually capturing screens.
It's funny they're using ngrok for the local VNC server side. I mean, it's very similar to some stuff we're doing.
ngrok is cool.
Slick.
I just played with it in a class. It's like, holy mackerel, that shit's neat.
Yeah, Google's got their
Pro is even better.
With Android, Google's got their work cut out, because on Pixel devices they can be better about security and updates, but it like all Linux, it's forked and used by Huawei and many other companies, and what does that security look like?
Lineage OS right here, baby.
Yeah, which is why I am excited for Pixel 6, which hopefully coming out this fall.
Yeah, so that's an interesting comment, Paul, because I've been sort of a OnePlus fan for a while.
Yeah,
but
OnePlus does a good job, though.
They do a really good job. They don't have all the crapware on there, but it is not original, pure, unadulterated Android, though. It is their version of the operating system.
I mean, as long as they keep up with it, but then you're kind of like, you're in the Debian world or any Linux distro that makes the decision for you how they treat bug fixes and or patch vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
right?
You're one step removed.
Yes,
that's the issue. And there's always going to be an intrinsic delay in that, and you're accepting that risk because you're not, But
that being said, OnePlus is a cool. I mean, I'd take that risk for a OnePlus device, Joff. I think it's super cool.
My latest one. It's a great device. I mean, I've been nothing but happy with them. But I've been tempted to go back to the Pixel. Been tempted.
Pixel 6 coming out in October.
Yeah. Did you, Paul? Did you ever think you'd see the day?
Yeah. What did you have? An Android device?
Pixel 3.
Pixel 3.
Yep.
Nice.
What the hell?
My pen test phone. Don't worry. The 10 is still here and others for.
I take it all back.
Yep. Wiggle War Drive for wireless CTF.
Yeah. The Pixel platforms are great.
The Wiggle app only runs on Android.
And, I mean, Pixel 3, 4s, and 5s are just, they're amazing pieces of technology.
It's funny. So a bunch of guys that I work with, like, their day-to-day is Android, and they love it. But when they pen test mobile apps and that type of stuff, they will only pen test iOS because that environment for them pen testing is more familiar. Me, I use iOS every day, and I can hack the shit out of Android. So the tables are turned. So this is my pen test phone. Unlock bootloader and Lineage and all that fun stuff.
I totally get that, and I'm weird that way because I'll pen test Android and use an Android, but who knows? So, maybe I'm nuts.
I'm just enamored with the smart toilets for some reason because I think it's. It's weird. Like when we talk about every device that you have is a computer, and I think it's really weird to think of your toilet as a computer. It's just bizarre, right? So a university in South Korea has devised a toilet that turns human waste into power, and as a bonus incentive, each use rewards the poopers with a small amount of digital currency that they can trade in for a cup of coffee or noodles on campus, which is just bizarre.
Isn't that a continuous loop? If you're getting coffee,
yes, it is, because coffee makes you poop, right? And we've seen the mug. Yeah.
So the cryptocurrency is called honey in English. So this truly is
it's sweet. It's a sweet deal. Like I poop and I can go get more coffee. Like what?
And noodles.
Like what is better than that? So it pumps your excrement into an underground tank.
Digging.
Right? It pumps your excrement into an underground tank, which means it uses less water. Microorganisms break down the waste into methane, which is a usable source of energy. Energy can be used to create Bitcoin, which then is transferred to me, and I use my Bitcoin to go buy a cup of coffee or noodles or both.
And, it brings a whole new meaning to the term in the cryptocurrency deals is called shitcoin. Mm-hmm. Those are like the ones that are like worth like fractions of, millions of a fraction of a cent, and they're absolute crap. Safe moon. But this brings a whole new meaning to shitcoin. Because
you know what? I think the skee ball machine.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that story actually makes my life feel very complete now. It's so many
crazy,
ways.
right?
So Bill just had that analogy of like it's the tickets that come out of the skee ball machine. I'm like, would those be shit tickets, or is that what you wipe your ass with?
Oh boy!
Wait, what?
Yeah,
the little squares of toilet paper. It's called shit ticket. Never mind.
Oh right,
Never mind.
That's a great note to end the show on.
Like this reminds me so much of like a composting toilet that spits out Bitcoin.
If you're hacking it, like, and I message you, and I'm like, Larry, what are you doing? You're like, I'm hacking shit. Damn.
Yeah. All those pictures of a turd in a toilet bowl that I sent to Darren over the years could have been worth money.
Could have been worth. It generates energy,
Man, I tell you, this show's really gone down the toilet.
Yeah, it's going right down the drain.
Right down the shitter.
With that, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
I don't know if I can. Over and out. I gotta go.